That's a megalith. And we're here in Appalachia. Today we're going to talk about this and all the other artifacts I've discovered that prove a prehistoric advanced civilization existed here in Appalachia. I'm going to tell you the story of how I came to that conclusion. Megalith. I'm also going to tell you how you can help me prove it. Have you ever found a rock that when you looked at it, you just felt like it was something? Like man had worked it. But it was too indistinguishable that you couldn't prove it. But you started collecting these rocks, right? You start collecting them and people start looking at you weird. Have you ever had a friend come up to you and say, "Hey man, look at this rock I found"? And you're like, "Nah dude, that's just a rock." "Yeah, I have. That was me. Sorry." I need to apologize to all my rock people.
I'm sorry, Fabrizio.
Che sorry, ma vaffanculo.
I apologize for failing to see and appreciate the truth behind it.
Get on with it!
Now, before we get started with this bad boy right here, we got to talk about some other things first. We got to talk about my initial discovery and a shout out to Jimmy at Bright Insight. Because I reached out to that guy and I was like, "Hey bro, I'm a fellow vet and I found something. And I don't care. I just want people to know. I don't want any glory." I was like, "Hey man, do you want this? I'll get everything all documented and I'll send it to you and you can get the glory." Whatever, I didn't say that. I didn't say glory. Squirrels better not steal my stuff. I gotta go back. And I'm pretty sure he read the message. But, you know, 1,000,000 subscribers. He's probably traveling all over the world doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So, I'm gonna do it. So there I was hanging up Halloween decorations for my wife. Fortunately, I listened, right? Because I found this thing on the ground and it spoke to me. It was just like one of those things that catches your eye, and it looked like these scratches. They were funny scratches that just didn't look natural. I picked up the stone, and it was one of those situations where you just feel like it was something. Like, you know, this is a organic shape. This looks like, you know, a head of some kind, you know, or an egg or a potato. Anyway, as it's been called. This potato, this egg shaped, you know, I walked away with it and looked in the sun and started to notice that it had features to it. Eventually saw that there was a masculine and feminine side at first, what I thought. And later, I now believe that one side is some kind of alien side and the other is reptilian to some degree.
Blasphemer! You are to be stoned to death!
And, you know, we can get into that later. But this stone blew my mind. How could I have found this in my flippin' flower bed? Why is it there? It doesn't make any sense. But then the second thought is, well, if it's there, then there's got to be more, right? Could find some other stuff. So I go back and I look at these stones because I think that there's got to be more. There's got to be more to this. Or, you know, if that was there, then there's other stuff. So I go back and I'm looking at all the stones in our flower bed and I'm noticing things about them. Like, you know, I'm good at picking up patterns. And some of the things I'm noticing is, one, they look all beat up, like destruction. It's kind of strange how beat up these things are, these river rocks. River rocks are supposed to be smooth and, you know, shapely. But these things are just like river rocks that have been beat to hell. It's kind of strange. And the more I look, I'm starting to see marks that look man-made. I'm starting to discover like shapes that look familiar. After I went back and I started noticing these shapes, I started collecting things that I felt, you know, you could say were something. Marks that were clearly man-made, symmetrical lines, this, that, and the other. I still didn't know what I was looking at. I was just collecting things that I felt like were something. The other thing that was important was, where the hell does this come from, right? If this is some kind of destruction, rubble, something or other, it had to come from somewhere. So I contacted the builder who built our home and found out where they got their stones from. I ended up tracking it to the original quarry, and the story seems to be that these things are dredged out of the Ohio River. Okay? So imagine for a second, all the hills and the areas around West Virginia and Ohio, all these stones that are just laying around eventually wash down the creeks and down the valleys and out the hollers and into the Ohio River. And they all get collected on the bottom and scooped up and sold to our flower beds. And so as I'm looking at this stuff, I'm realizing This is rubble from a civilization. I don't really know how to prove it, but I could feel it. It was kind of strange and eerie as I looked at it. It looked like it was beat to hell. So I find out where this stuff comes from. Okay. And I go back and I'm looking and I'm trying to find things that are undeniably man-made or man-marked. And I'm starting to find things that look like toes, or what I thought was a toe. I definitely found a hoof. I mean, undeniably a hoof. I found what I believe to be a petrified foot of a statue. But that was kind of it. The things that had these markings on them, I couldn't really tell what the markings were, and I couldn't really put a description completely to what these things were. And then your kid saves you, right? So we're sitting there in the kitchen, and I'm kind of looking at these things, speculating, this is the toe of something, and, I don't know. It was kind of dumb now that I look back and understand what things are. And my kid looks at the stone, and she's like, it's a snake head. And this kid's an artist, right? This kid draws unbelievable. She is, kind of an artistic genius. And I trust her perspective. I'm artistic to some degree myself, but not at her level. It's like skips generations. And this kid's like, yeah, snakehead. And I'm looking at him like, you know what, you're right. And I went back and I started looking at everything with the perspective of snakes, serpents. And it opened a whole new world. So at this point, I'm, looking at everybody's flower bed or all the ones I have access to, which was just like 3. It wasn't very many. And the amount of things that I found in just those flower beds was unbelievable. And some of the things I've discovered is that these things appear to be mass produced. These things have very similar shapes and very similar breaks. So I go back and I'm looking at this stuff, and I have the perception of snake. I'm kind of looking at it from, the serpent perspective. And I end up finding this little tablet looking job. And I eventually see that it has a snake head, which appears to be consuming a star. And that star is a 6-pointed star. Okay, fine. That's an ancient symbol. We don't want to talk about that in the modern context. Okay, I get it. However, snake eating a star. At this point, I'm comparing the things that I'm finding, right? And the most significant finds at that point were really just that statue head that looked two-faced, looked like an alien and a reptilian, and this little tablet piece that had a snake eating a star. My next idea is like, well, let's go to the garden center and just dig through the pile. I go to the garden center and start digging through the pile of river rocks that clearly are from the same location. And I'm starting to notice tons of consistencies. It's just incredible. These things must have been mass produced. Consistent shapes, consistent breaks, consistent marks. Some of these faint marks that are showing up on these stones seem to be popping up in the same locations. So, like, these natural rocks just fall off the side of, Stone Mountain or whatever, and they all just look the same, and they're all broken the same. That's kind of strange. I don't think so. And as I'm looking at these things, they're all kind of, similarly marked. There's faint stars in the same location. And then I find this one stone that looks like a clump of cement, honestly. I thought it was trash at first, like literally cement. And I'm looking at it, and there appears to be like some type of fragment. It looked like a tail of a alligator or something. Like it had scales on it, and it was a chunk. And I originally thought, maybe these artists or whoever made all this crap, um, you know, took a bunch of broken pieces and stuffed it inside a statue because it had the shape of something. And as I took this thing home and I'm looking at it, and I'm realizing it's not concrete. It's not a bunch of pieces glued together. It's a flippin' fossilized statue.
Now, you knew that anyway, and we don't care, so where's the surprise?
There's like some biker dude now. I gotta look stupid. This is terrible. Oh, I'm so embarrassed.
So, I had a bad experience.
Oh.
So I was bothered by the bike guy, and he ended up just going away after a moment, and I got all my gear back on and masked up, as we said back in 2020. And I started to talk again, and here comes, Nana, who was just barely a Nana, right? And she was chatty. So chatty, things got a little bit weird.
What was it like? Go into like really lengthy and vivid detail about the whole thing. I want to hear about it like blow by blow.
So I had to bounce. And in the process of that bounce, I made a mistake.
Oh, ow. Where's my microphone?
Turns out that little stumble cost me my microphone, and I didn't realize it. I went on to film the rest of this video, and, the footage wasn't usable. I was mostly walking and talking, and nothing real fun to see, and the audio was terrible. So I'm going to blame that on Jimmy from Bright Insight, actually. Thanks, Jimmy, for ruining my video.
This is it.
I'm just kidding. Jimmy over at Bright Insight's a pretty good dude. He's got a great channel, and he's totally opened my eyes on an alternative view of history. And if you haven't watched any of his videos, I suggest you go check him out. I'm not sure his last name. I think it's one of those sausage names. But Bright Insight is the channel. He's a fellow vet also, so thank you for your service, bro.
Sycophant!
So let's get back to things. Now that we got this new fantastic situation where I can't use all my footage, what we're going to do is we're going to do some show and tell instead. Instead of having some images up on the screen, we're just going to set up the camera, and I'm going to hold these things and discuss them as we tell the story. When I originally found this, I thought probably what you're thinking is that's just trash. A clump of cement that I about tossed over my shoulder. But then this caught my attention, this shape. You see, I'd come back to this pile with the perspective of snakes, serpents, reptiles that my kid put in my brain, that we're looking at some type of culture that cared about these things, those topics. And so I ended up adding this to the bucket because this really looked like a tail of something. But at the same time, where this tail, if that's what it is, where it's located on the overall structure, it doesn't really make artistic sense. It looks like something glued together, honestly. And my original theory for this was that this is the inside of a statue where an artist might have taken multiple bits and glued them together to fill the void for an armature or something to that effect. And then I quickly tossed that idea as what appears to be one of our stars. A snake eating a star, right? That's what we're kind of looking for. One of these stars kind of appears to be or have been present. Okay. When you flip this around, ignore that. That's travesty to history. We'll talk about that later. When you flip it around, you'll notice that some of the damage, because remember, there's damage in all these things that we're looking at, and the damage tells a lot. And when we get into the details of each individual item, I'll explain why the damage matters. But in this case, this is damaged right here. You can see the interior of the stone, and you'll notice the interior and the exterior are different. That caught my attention, right? What is that? Why is it like that? It started looking like silly putty as I looked in it, and it appeared to be carvings filled in, right? Look at this. Right, you see that? Right through here. Like we got a little tiny star right here. Let's see if I can get that better. But it just looked like something was smeared with crap. And then I realized with the shape that it was, in fact, another one of my fragments. And it was, in fact, a serpent of some kind eating a star. Now, this is what I believe it looked like to some degree. Over here we've got, the eye section. Right? It comes up to a snout. It's got a particularly hooked type mouth. And we have a star on the inside. Now, what the star would have looked like, it's my opinion that it actually protruded in multiple directions, and it's all been broken off, and all we see is just where some of it would have been. I also think this would have been a three-dimensional, six-pointed star. Something like a more sharp version of this, right? It would have been protruding from its mouth. And so I came to the conclusion that this was one piece. It's something like this. It's been broken off, right here, it's been broken off of something radiused. What in history have you seen that is radius like that, that might have multiple little snake heads? Well, I know in the Far East we see examples similar to this, where the deity will be centered, and then I think there's like 7-headed serpent gods, and all kinds of variations that we see over in India. And we'll see examples where these heads are attached to some type of backplate that's radiused, and the multiple heads will be positioned around that, and then the main deity will be in the center. I believe that this is one of those heads. This is one-sided. Here, it's twisting one direction. He's looking. I believe personally this would have been a left-handed portion, because as you flip it, the break's on this side, and artistically, as you look at it, it doesn't look as pleasing as on this side. Now, what's actually going on under here, right? You can see there's some stuff going on. Well, what really blew my mind, what really made this all come together and made this the missing link, was this portion. After I had determined that this was fossilized and I needed to bust out the trusty old pencil etcher to reveal what's truly going on underneath, one of the things I did was, because I determined this to be the attach point of the statue fragment and broken, I chose to test out my pencil etcher in this area. I turned that thing up and blasted this, and it did nothing. It was amazing. I went to town. I can't tell you how hard I went with this little area, and this is all it did. So it was my original naive idea that I can just kind of, do that, which was stupid, and all the fossil people are like, you fool, you, ugh. Yeah, all the fossil people hate me right now because I accidentally chipped off this fragment going too hard with my pencil etcher, and I toned it down. Okay, so travesty to history, this potential 20, 10, 12,000 year old statue, I just hacked, right? I went, bow, blasted that thing off. What a dummy. Anyway, I go to etching, and I go a lot slower and softer, and it took way longer. And I started in this area because it was the most promising. So on the back side of this thing, we've got what appears to be a vulture head, okay? If you look right here, that's a better profile. We've got the vulture, we've got the notch in its beak, and it also appears that we've got a little fishy right here. Baby shark, do. So, a bird consuming a fish. That is actually the eye of our serpent. Look on this side. So what does that tell us? That tells us that this tail is not just a glued together statue fragment. It tells us that it's a part of another smaller artistic expression in this overall larger piece. So what we see here is a smaller scene, completely unrelated to the overall, serpent nature of it. We have a bird and a fish that makes up the eye. That's amazing. Here comes another apology.
I'm sorry I was whack.
I don't know how many times rock people came to me and they're like, hey man, look at this. If you look at it this way, it's like a dragon or a serpent. And if you look at it this way, it's like a bird. And I was like, man, that's nuts. You better stop talking like that. And here I am looking at this thing. It's overall one artistic expression of a snake or serpent eating a star, and it's made up of smaller artistic expressions, like a bird eating a fish.
I warned you, but did you listen to me? Oh, no, you knew it all, didn't you?
Now, as I'm researching these things and trying to figure out what the heck is going on, some of the stuff that I'm learning is that the vulture is, or I guess vulture, is very important to the ancient world. And we will talk more about that later because I have since found stones that appear to be some version of that. The large majority of these things that we're dealing with are some kind of snake or serpent with some type of star in its mouth. That's honestly, as I look at the majority of what I've collected, that seems to be it, which is strange. There's so much of it. But what makes sense is we have all these extra heads. So if this were the case and it was a multi-headed deity, each person that possessed one of these statues didn't have one snake head. They had at least 8 or 7. And if these people had multiple statues in their homes and in their shops and wherever, whenever this cataclysm came, it would do a bunch of damage and grind up all these little heads. They get busted off their bases, and you end up with fragments that appear to be radius tablets, and then attach points from similar type things. And when we do look at the back where that break is, not my break, ignore that. When we look on the back and we see what I revealed to be a vulture, and then the fish here, this felt familiar. Once I got all this etched off, this little fishy and this bird head, I felt like I had seen it before. I had seen this on what I told myself was a melted pop can. Let me explain. Okay, here we have one of my metal detecting finds. This was found at an old dairy farm in the local area, and I received permission to hit this plot after it had been sold. I didn't find anything great, but I found this, and eventually I chalked it up to a melted pop can. However, I couldn't help but notice when I found it that there appeared to be a bird on it. As I examined this piece that I thought was a pop can, I did notice that there happened to be carvings, or what could be carvings and designs. It appears almost that there's some stars through here. We have some stars in here. We have our little fish down here and the beak of the bird. Now, when I found the fossilized head and that bird, this popped into my head, and I remembered the fish and the bird. And when you compare them, it's strikingly similar. I mean, yeah, it's not exactly the same. But I have a fossilized statue, and then I have what appears to be an old piece of aluminum that should have corroded long ago with some stars on it. It's got some fish. You can kind of almost see another fish right here. We got more fish. And they're almost the same art style, or to some degree similar. I would say that this fossilized head, ancient in my opinion, is also connected to this piece of aluminum, an alloyed aluminum. Now, you're thinking, okay, well, that just kind of looks similar. You don't have anything else, Actually, I do. I have a lot more. This made me start looking at pieces of metal like this. And I have found many more that resemble the fragments that we're finding. Okay, this one I originally believed, to be just another version of one of these, which would have surrounded our deity, right? That's kind of what we discussed about. And the reason I believe that is because here are some examples of the others that I'm finding. Here we have a couple that are similar but different. For example, these two are fairly rectangular, this one more so. You can still see some of the faint designs on it, here and here. You should be able to see a remnant of the star here. Likewise, on this one, we have the remnant of our star right about here on the edge of the mouth. And on this one, I believe it to be positioned like this. You can faintly make out stars in this area. There's something going on over here, but I can't really tell some designs. Nothing real too convincing on this one. It's more of just demonstrating the different variations that we're finding of these things. And so naturally I thought that this is one of those. Now, when I discovered the fossilization thing, I went through my collection and I realized, well, that's probably fossilization. And you can see some geometric shapes in here. faintly. But I busted out the pencil etcher again and worked on this one, and what I uncovered was what appears to be some kind of scale, right? I removed most of this area. I'll flip it this way. And you can see in here, it's carved out. And I personally believe that these convex surfaces would have resembled this, only they just weren't protected by sediment, and they were on the exterior and not interior surface. So I'm looking at this as we're making these videos, and I realized that I'm not really seeing the stars that should be in the mouth area. I'm not seeing, and I really don't, I won't believe something, I won't claim it is a thing without the evidence. Even though I know that's the same general shape, I'm not going to give it credit unless I've got the markings. And so in this one, I wasn't going to say that that's what it was. And as I was looking at it, I was like, that awfully looks like two snakes that are biting each other. And so I drew it down. And this is what I see. So we have one snake on the left that seems to be forward of the one on the right. The one on the right, you can faintly see where the fangs would have been carved into here. I personally think that this head would have been thicker in comparison to this one, and we're probably missing an eye. And as I looked at it, I was like, I really had trouble figuring out what this was. And as I was looking at it, I saw the perspective of this. And it really felt like a tail that was closer to you, going off into the distance and then coming back, as you see. Now, this purple portion right here, I personally now believe that to have been a remnant of a star that they were fighting over, or it's just slightly underneath them. One of the things I am seeing a lot, besides stars in the mouths and the eyes, under the chin. That's another thing. Stars under the chin. Here's one with a star remnant under the chin, right here. So mouth, chin. Okay, so we got these stars, and I'm looking at the backside, and perspective-wise, well, that makes sense because it appears that from this angle, the one that's in the back then becomes the one in the front. Now, I was on eBay, and I was looking for things similar to this. Because if you remember, this is our metal fragment that connects us to our first fossilized statue. So I was looking for things like this, and I found a lot. It was a lot that a metal detector guy was pretty much selling that was like, trash, right? He just had his random things that he didn't really know what they were in a pile, and I bought the whole thing. And I bought it because of this. This scale in here was very reminiscent of this. Also, I noticed that they had, the same kind of general shape to some degree. Here's another example of scale that we've got left in here. And so this very much felt like one of my items. And now, after examining this and realizing that it is, in fact, two snakes going after each other, I realized that this is the same thing. I originally examined this. I thought, likewise, it was also some variation of this, right? But it was just too beat up and indistinguishable from, time and history. But when I realized that this was two serpents going after each other, I started looking at this one, and it sure looks like there's an eye there, and it sure looks like there's an eye right there. And these could possibly be two snakes, right? And when you flip it, it sure really looks like that's an eye, and that's an eye, and we have two separate snakes. So we compare these on the backside. it's striking. I mean, it really feels like the same thing. Not literally the same thing, but it intended to be the same depiction. Now, I found this metal detecting on a local farm, but this one came off eBay. Well, let's think about that for a second. This little double snake, which is strikingly similar to this one, this came from Michigan. If I understand correctly, it was from metal detecting on the shores of Lake Michigan. So it's either one of two things. Luckiest man in the world, act of God. Or there's a good chance that these things were produced to such a scale, or there was such a uniform style of art that we might be able to find more than just these. That this isn't the only one. That it's just not a freak accident that I happen to find the exact same thing on eBay. But rather that we all can find these, especially if you live in this area. There's a good chance that you guys might find exactly this, which is nuts. I totally found another one. It wasn't a couple days after I made that clip. I recalled that I had a bucket from the garden center that I hadn't gone through, and so I decided, well, I better go through it, make sure there's nothing good in there. And I noticed this, and I thought, there's no way. It's not a chance. And after I got to looking at it, I think that there's probably a fairly decent chance. As you move it around and look at it, you can kind of see that, yeah, that's probably was the same thing. It's not the overall same exact shape, but like on this edge, you can see where it's been ground down a whole bunch right here. It's so much wear and tear. And we do have some concretion going in these gaps. I don't think we'll get much detail, not as much as this, but there's something in there. There also appears to be an eye right about here. So yeah, I think that we have a winner. I mean, it's not exact, but it's good enough. It's good enough to say that these things are probably mass-produced. There's the odds of this, it's just not there, which means they should be able to be found. And in fact, I would bet someone out there somewhere has one of these exact versions. Fortunately, there was more in that lot that I bought. So I have, 4 or 5 of these that I have exact examples of. A metal, which appears to be some type of aluminum, and some type of stone, fossilized or not, that are essentially the same image. Now, I'm not going to show you all the other ones I have today that are examples of this. I'm going to save those for another video and leave a little cliffhanger in there because I really feel like I've delivered in this video, and I will continue to deliver. So stick around. We're going to get to that megalith, but we got to talk about one last thing.
I forgot to talk about mosaics. And not this stuff. That's just a painted wall. I'm actually talking about like rocks glued into crap.
Now, the whole time I'm looking at all these things, really from the beginning, I'm finding these rocks that appear to have some, rusty pebbles glued to them somehow. They're attached in various ways, and they all seem to have similar characteristics. And they ended up being one of the big key features that brought all this together. One of the first things I found that I could really say I knew what it was this. This is a snake, and he appears to be carved in a crosshatch pattern across his top. There's a line splitting him, almost like you see a tongue here. We got an eye, and then it's like he's just on something. It appears to be broken off. And we have this substance on the back. Almost as if it had been glued into something. And this caught my attention. And I kept finding things that looked like this. I had seen these when I was a kid, and I always thought that a rusty nail rusted out, pretty much corroded, and collected a pile of rocks. But that's not what this is. It wasn't until I found this one and I had noticed where it had something bonded into it. You see the radius in it. And when you start finding things that look like this, not to say that that was there, but it's reminiscent. You can almost see the shape of what was an eye. You can see details of what might have been on the fragment it was bonded to. But this made me realize this had been attached to something. It was adhered to what I believe to be a wall. Now here's another one I found that was fantastically interesting. When you look at him, he's got some designs in here around the side of his face. So faintly. There we go. You can see. And I thought that this was broken. I mean, it is. But I thought that, time did this. I thought that this was just damage from existence. That's pretty. And as I got to looking at it, it very clearly looks like it has been bonded in there separate. So the artist, whenever they made this, they intentionally had that separate to give it the appearance of a mouth. This clump, you could study it for a minute. There might be more going on, but that was virtually all I noticed. But these things, you can almost see a remnant of what was a star here. These are fantastically common. You almost always find something that looks like a snake head bonded to a clump of this crap. And sometimes it'll look like this. It'll be a larger portion that appears to have been glued into something. Interesting. Or sometimes they'll be like this. And if you imagine the adhesive ran up on this, so all that you saw would be this gray color here. So it would look something like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but it would be sunk into something. It would be glued and attached to something. Now it almost seems with this piece. Again, another one you can't make much out. You can see something's going on, but not exactly what. However, here's a portion that looks like it had been bonded to something. And you'll notice that it almost looks like that same material that is being used to make these is also possibly used to glaze these surfaces or coat in some form. I found many examples that when I eventually do a mosaic video, I can show where they've used it as like this exterior coating that they can mold into what they want. It's really pretty interesting. Now I'll stop here with the mosaic stuff so we can get on with that megalith. But this is what really lent me to the idea of mass production in the beginning. I originally noticed that when I found this one, it had a cool shape, and it really looked like it had been bonded into something, right? Same kind of thing that we're discussing, it's getting bonded to things. And I found another one. And they're roughly the same overall shape. Definitely feel like they got the same thing going on. These really, they had all kinds of art styles. All kinds of metalwork, stonework, epoxies. I have a couple of these fragments that appear to be some type of advanced composite. Now, one thing you don't know about me is I spent the last 20 years in the Air Force working as an aircraft structural maintenance technician. And I became a 7 level. I was a subject matter expert on advanced composites, aircraft part fabrication and corrosion control. And 20 years of that and going to some special schools, it teaches you things about composites and adhesives and metals. And I'm seeing a lot of things that are reminiscent of that. I'm finding a lot of stuff that looks like, parts that I just pulled off of an airplane, like where it was bonded. I'm finding whole heads that really do appear to be a composite and not really stone. I'm looking at this with the perspective of a little bit of experience. Obviously archaeology isn't necessarily one of them, and I'm sure I'll be laughed at some point for all this stuff. But, that's why I covered my face. Let's talk about that megalith. Walking on my local trail, I saw this rock that just felt familiar. After all the research I've been doing, it really seemed like one of the things that I've been dealing with. And I came back and brushed off all the leaves and got a brush, and I noticed that there was a inlaid stone for its eye, and you can see that there's like carvings through here. Clear nostril, and there's some crisscross patterns across the top. And I would bet that if we dig in here, if it's left, there's some kind of star or something left that was in its mouth. This thing should be like that. I should take a second to discuss the stone that I believe is the exact match for our megalith. Yeah, it's tiny, and you're probably going to think this is silly, but hear me out. As you look at this stone, it's the same kind of general shape, but when you flip it to the opposite side, it has this kind of cut to it. I don't know if you can see that, but it's got this nice. Look at that. Anyway, finding stuff. We've got this cut right here. And that cut is there because that's the way the snake bends, right? So if he stands up like this, and you look from the top down, he's offset slightly. So on one side, which would be this side, right, it's nice and clean. And the opposite side, he should have some kind of bend to him, just like our megalith does. Wow. After looking at this thing and thinking about it, it's pretty clear that it was probably up here.
You're wrong. Not this time. It never happened.
When you walk up here,
Badado. Bad from me.
wow. We're back here up on the mountain because we're finding stuff as we edit videos. If that's not a reason to subscribe to this channel, I'm not really sure I know what is. You guys got to come along for this ride with us, man, because it's going to be amazing. We're going to learn so much. I'm learning stuff as I go. I didn't even have this until we were working on the journey, okay? So I was editing the piece of footage, and this face just screamed at me. I had to take it to my wife and be like, are you seeing this, or am I just, getting crazy with this stuff? And she was like, yeah, totally see it. And I sent it to a couple other friends. They're like, yeah, I can see it too. So I came back up here real quick just to see if, it wasn't just moss being weird, and those carvings are there. They're faint, but the profile of the face is pretty heavy. As you get up to it, it kind of becomes a little bit more blurrier because that moss hides it. But those carvings are there. And what's even cooler is if you look to the right of that gap between the two rock faces, there's some more stuff. You can see the eyes right there. Anyways, I came up here to get a better shot of that face, or to see what I could see. You see any extra carvings, and you can almost make out some carvings up here. That's not really the cool part. The cool part is, as I looked back here, I noticed there are some pretty good carvings in here. If you look in there, you can see something. So I started digging out all the brush, and I realized that there's definitely carvings in there. So we're going to climb up in there and get some footage. Let's see what we got. Okay, here we are on the opposite side, and that crack that we were just looking at, it runs all the way through. It's a real tight space, probably about a foot, really, and the only way I was able to get this video was to put my camera on an extension and climb up in there and stretch out my arm. There was a large rock in the way that I essentially had to lay on, and it was very difficult just to get in there. However, I was really amazed at what I found. These videos are actually from, just a one-shot kind of deal. I made the videos and left and haven't gone back for it since. But you'll see beautiful snake right there, and I did get some footage of some other stuff. But that whole wall seems to be covered in snakes or serpents, and also stars, larger and smaller. There's a lot smaller carving in there, which is kind of interesting because the larger images are also made up of more intricate stuff. Here I think we're looking at some remnants of stars. However, pigment is present. That'll be better demonstrated on the other side. But right now we're looking straight up, and to the left actually is the hillside, or the main wall. And note this face. What's up with that? Hopefully maybe that's just the light and the shadow of whatever carvings, it's actually something else, but man, that looks creepy AF. I don't know. What's your opinion? Anyways, you can see the space and how big it actually is. But what's interesting about that space, beyond the carvings all over the wall, that I didn't get a great video of, you'll notice it's like triangular. Well, what has happened is, whatever that big megalith monument has fallen against this hillside. And that hillside appears to be megalithic rocks. Do you see that straight line that runs through? It goes straight across all the way to the other side and splits up the carving. Sorry for the strobe effect. I figured that kind of helped a little bit to get some designs. But you'll notice at the end here, this end cap appears to be completely carved in serpents. You can see some pigment in there. There's some white. Yeah, I thought there was a handbag. There's not a handbag. But yeah, I got excited. It's just more snakes. It's all snakes, right? At the end of the day. Now, something cool that should be noted that I realized from the space is that triangular nature of it. Well, that implies that continues, that trajectory. So the space, in theory, should get bigger as you go further down. And we should be able to dig out that debris. So it would make sense that as we dig out that debris or the material that is in that space, that we would reveal more carvings the further down we go. I did go back up there and actually dug a little bit and started to discover some artifacts. And they were some of them were deteriorated, but some of them were in much better shape than the ones that I'm finding in creeks and the river rock collection. Now, I mentioned how a lot of these things matched, like the art styles, or the rocks looked like other things. Well, here's an example of the carving on the wall looking like one of the stones I'd found. It's just another one of those situations where it connects across medium. Okay, now we're looking outward. Our back is to the hillside, and we're looking at the megalith with the face on it. And we've got much better pigment on this side. There's a reddish color, and you can also see white in there as well. I have this close up, and I put this in there because look how intricate that is. This is a megalith. The thing is huge. What were they doing?
All right, we're just up from our little megalith that's right here, and off in the distance, what we got is the ancient Taze River Valley. This valley used to flow with a river during the last ice age sometime, and something happened that disrupted the flow, and it's now just a dry river valley. We're currently positioned at an inlet or a holler that jets off of that valley, and our megalith is sitting right there. So one thing I've noticed interesting about this area is that there's a step, right? And this step exists on all the hills, almost as if there was a water line. And when you see this spot on a map, these little hollers here, these inlets that go out there, they seem to have been squared off, almost as if they were symmetrical, like, a modern harbor would be. So I can only imagine that all this would be full of water, and the water line up to there, and then you pull up to your boat, dock your boat, and then you got these deities and these giant snakeheads. A couple things to note from this location. It's this rock over here. I've just noticed it's got a pretty straight edge to it. It's my opinion that these stones were probably parts of monuments that when you pulled into port, you saw, the deities or whatever we worshipped at the day.
Now, to piggyback off that, as First Sergeant would say, I'd like to point out something pushed that off the base, right? Something was strong enough, something happened strong enough to take that head and knock it onto the ground. Something also was strong enough to redirect the flow of that river, okay? Now, in context, look at all these things that we're looking at. They're all deformed, they're all messed up. Imagine for a second a society that has all these beautiful statues and all these deities that they worship, and everybody in their home has their statue. And then all of a sudden something horrific happens. Let's just say the flood is true because, 10 different cultures believe that it happened and not just the biblical story is there. So there's more to it. So let's say that something like that happens, some big catastrophe. Well, that makes sense that it would take all those statues and all their artwork, and it would be crumbled into these barely recognizable chunks, and there would be just remnants of markings after being in this tumbling effect, right? Just like you get a pretty rock and you throw it in the tumbler. A lot of those rocks are probably these that are so unrecognizable, but they used beautiful materials to make them. And you take these rocks and throw them in a tumbler, just like the big tumbler. If a big flood happened, it would be a big tumbler. It would take a beautifully intricate whatever shape, and it would beat it down to just barely recognizable form of its former self. And I have an example of that. Okay, back again with our fossilized statue head. And the example that I have, I believe it to be one of those. And what leads me to believe that? Well, primarily it's this back portion right here. As you look at it, it has the same overall general shape. It twists. And in the back, these deep cuts, this is not damage, but rather this is original to the structure. You can see a nice little... This is original to the carving. And I believe this back portion to be something very similar, if not the same deity and or design. But overall, I'd say that's a pretty good case, especially on that star portion. Once you get over to where the star is at, you can see where it would have been. Right in this area. Get some remnants in here. But as we look at this, I bet a lot of people see things that are similar in their stones. Because what's really happening is we have these beautiful, intricate carvings that are going through a cataclysm. And then after that, they end up in creeks and valleys, and rivers, and they go through all kinds of hell. So naturally, this is a miracle. We're not going to get perfect examples like this. This is so fantastically unique. What we're more likely to get are these, the end result of this going through that hell, going through that big tumbler. So look at your stones and consider, could some of those bizarre marks that appear on some of your stones, could they have been a part of a larger carving that has just been worn down over time? This stone I was particularly excited about when I found it. It was one of the earlier things that I found. And what made me so excited was this pyramid, right? I mean, finding pyramids carved into rocks in West Virginia is pretty cool. There also seems to be an inverted one here. Mostly gone, but what's left of it's there. And after, coming to all the conclusions that I've come to and where I am currently, I relooked at this, and it very clearly was probably just another one of our statues, something like this. You can see where the eye would have been, and likewise on the other side. It makes sense for it to have snapped off in this position, It'd be the weak point of the structure. So then what are our pyramids? Well, you see my clay up there in the corner. As I was looking at it, I thought, you know what? I bet that that's just the most inner portion of the carving. So when I take my little Sculpey bits here and I stick them on to where those go, hopefully it stays, it makes sense from a perspective point of view. All these things I discussed are to be looked at from certain perspectives. I believe I mentioned that earlier. But when I put my two faux fangs here, it makes complete sense. They're staggered. It makes sense that it would be staggered because it would be viewed from the side. It's not being viewed from the front. It's not symmetrical. It's very much one-sided, like most things that we're finding. And when I put two, pyramid or three-sided pyramids on there, that's what we get. Just put them in the location. And that makes sense for staggered fangs. So the viewer would be able to see, there are two fangs on that statue. Because artistically, if you put them in line with each other, well, it would just drown out the other one. It just disappears. But it makes sense when it's staggered. So even though, that's not like I have another example of this, I think that demonstrates in a good way how the things that we're looking at are not, in their original form. They are hundreds of thousandths of an inch or more smaller than they were in the very beginning. And so we're only seeing the very most deepest marks and grooves of these things. I really need to wrap this up because, the more I make this video, the more discoveries I make, which is kind of getting crazy. But I'd like to start off by sharing just a short story. When I was a child, I was living here in West Virginia, and I found a stone, and I remember the distinct memory of thinking, wow, it really looks like that stone is a snake with a star in its mouth. And I remember the star looked very distinct, but I had been taught that's not possible, right? What I was looking at was a natural object, and it just is a coincidence. And I threw it over my shoulder and went on about my life. And that I was probably in grade school when that happened. And now I'm realizing that it was true. It was completely true. Mine wasn't like this, but this is a good example. You can see his little fangs. And he's got a triangle in his mouth where it would have been the deepest point of his star. So when I found this one, it reminded me very much of the one that I had discovered when I was a kid, because the star would have been in that hole, or in that goop right there. I'm sorry, this is really terrible. Anyways, this is another one of those fossilized items. This is crud that can be removed to reveal a design underneath. You guys need to look for this stuff. All the fossil people, or people that care about, rocks and minerals or that sort of thing, start looking for what appears to be like a silly putty kind of junk, because there's stuff going on underneath. You can see the designs. This takes forever to get to. It actually goes like this. It takes forever to get to, but there are designs under there. There are carvings under there. So start checking all your collections and seeing if any of those are fossilized. But anyways, as I started this, and I recalled that small rock, I didn't realize that it would get so big. And when I mean big, I mean bigger than that megalith. You see, when I was doing, some research and trying to figure out what was going on over in that area, I noticed the port situation, or what could be a port. And I started looking at the hills around, and I started seeing some pretty crazy things, some things that I really just don't think are natural. And I think it further proves that this area was inhabited by an advanced civilization. I don't want to get into it. I've got tons of photos. I've spent essentially any time that I have free time, I'll be looking at maps and finding potential places of interest, we'll say. And in the future, what we're going to do is all these different categories of things that I'm talking about, whether it's the megalith stuff or the carvings on the rocks out in nature, or these stones individually. I'm going to create individual videos that are categorically specific, so we can learn as much as possible about each category of these relics. These are artifacts. 100%, they are artifacts, and there's a ton of them, like so much that I don't feel bad when I break something. I'll just get another one in the same shape. Like, it's stupid, it's ridiculous. If you're on the East Coast of the United States, at minimum, all over the world I suggest, but if you're on the East Coast, at minimum, start looking in your creek beds. If you have river rocks sold in the area, just look down at those river rocks. See if you see anything that looks, interesting, that speaks to you. And just keep that serpent image in your mind, potentially a serpent with stars around its mouth. You'll be amazed at what you find. Now, I've just made a large purchase from eBay of metals that I believe to be in this category, so look forward to videos about that. And I also expect to be making some pretty bold claims about snakeskin agate, this stuff. Yeah, I need to make a couple more purchases to verify my thoughts on it, but I think I'm going to say something pretty bold, and I'm going to do my best to make this as interesting as possible and real as possible. I don't want to have confirmation bias. I'm doing my best to be objective. I'm spending a lot of time with this stuff, so I'm seeing a lot of things, and I really hope to have everyone's input. Hear me out. Hear the full story first before you just tell me it's a rock. Because I was that dude. It's just a rock, man. Go away. It's not real. It's just, you're wasting your time. That was me. So I have jumped on the other side of the fence, and I'm definitely looking for everyone's input. Now, how can you help? Well, it's my opinion that this phenomenon that I'm experiencing in my local area with all these little artifacts is just not restricted to my local area. I've seen plenty of YouTube videos of unrelated topics where I can see the same stones in the background of these videos, and it's other parts of the world. Likewise, my wife pulls out the stone from her collection. It's one, right? She has one stone that she picked up on the beach in Taormina, Italy, in Sicily. And she showed me it, and I was looking at it, and it's very similar in shape to the other ones that I'm finding that I'm almost certain are the serpent with the star in the mouth. So that would tell me that this isn't just my local area. I'm seeing it on YouTube all over the world, and I have my own personal example. So I need you guys to look at your own collections, pay attention to your own local areas, and reach out to me when I get my Twitter X account set up. And reach out to me or follow me on Instagram at the Antediluvian Landfill, and we will share this information with the world and each other and put together the pieces of what's really going on here, because there's so much more going on. I've been able to figure out all this stuff just from my own collection. Imagine what we can do together.
finding these things for myself has really changed my perspective on things. And I'll be honest, it kind of started with the soft disclosure with the aliens in Congress. If you don't know, they've kind of discussed that these things exist and they might be interdimensional. Okay, well that's good to know, right? And so if they've fessed up to that, which they previously said didn't exist, what else are they lying about? What other mysteries that uh, intrigued you as a kid are they actually true? Um, and I re-looked at everything, especially history, and the things that I've found in my own world tell me something else. It's clear through things like the Carolina Bays. If you want to look something up, look up Carolina Bays. Uh, Things through like the Carolina Bays tell us that some major stuff went down, and they like to tell us that this Earth is nice and peaceful, and all this stuff was just collected over millennia, and it's just a slow process. And I don't buy that anymore. Not anymore. I used to. I was one of the people that I took the science for its word. Like the geologist, the archaeologist. I believed it all, and now I'm on YouTube wearing a mask. It is my hope that with this channel, we uncover the truths behind this ancient history. I hope to eventually network with everyone in the community that cares about this sort of thing, to paint a bigger picture than what I have, and to be able to eventually change history because they're not telling us something.
So stay tuned for the next video where we're going to discuss that initial find, and we're going to get into details about it, and we're going to get some good photos, and hopefully you guys can give me suggestions in the comments on what type of software I can use or what type of hardware I can use to take photos of these things to get real detailed imaging. The best I can do now is take a good photo with good light and then throw it on, Instagram or something, and mess with some filters, right? That's the best I can do. But if you guys have any suggestions, please put it in the comments below and help me figure this thing out, because I've got something here and I need your help.